Hello, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour Yinawea. I'm so excited to have this seminar series presented to you all from the FishCAST. I see some new faces or new names on the side. So for those of you who have not joined us before, my name is Tina Semenyuk. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Windsor on the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations People, which include the Odawa, the Ojibwa, and the Potawatomi. I'm so fortunate to be here in Wawaitanong, which is where the river bends. And we're not necessarily the sun parlor today, but we do have, my garlic is already coming up. So I think that's, yes, we are the sun parlor. Okay, so then, and I hope you can share what's growing in your end of your neck of the woods in the chat. And I also have tomatoes growing downstairs in my basement. So there you go. Okay, so then what is FishCast for those of you who might not know? Well, FishCast is entering its final year, the twilight year of a 6-year-long Insert Create program, of which we have Dr. Catherine Fabria, who is our associate director, and we also have one of our FishCast principal investigators, Dr. Stephen Cook, on the line, and I'm sure many partners as well. We're really a community of practice where we try to train the next generation of graduate students, not just in fisheries science and management, but in ways to really engage in true partnership and reciprocity and knowledge exchange, and to potentially have an impact not only with others, but also within ourselves. And one of the ways we do this is through seminar series. And we started our series by asking our PIs to present what they were doing when FishCast first started during 2020. And then we had our partners come in and tell us about their journeys through science and the sometimes non-linear routes that they took, but were instead circuitous. And we've now gotten to the point where we're now inviting back our FishCast trainees, our alumni, to come give a talk about their journey through science and where they are today, and just to impart some of the knowledge that they've been gleaning over the past few years. I am so happy to present to you Dr. Acacia Frempong Manso. She was one of our very first FishCast trainees, and she's made such an indelible impression. She joined our committees, she joined our workshops. She was such an amazing force. I'm so appreciative, Acacia, of what you contributed to FishCast and how you basically made it what it was, because we have such amazing trainees, and I'm so happy that you were our first cohort and you really established what we're really hoping for. Doesn't mean you can't trash FishCast in your talk today. Obviously, we want to learn and grow. So I'm not trying to bias anyone in any way, but again, I'll stop talking now, but I really wanted to say thank you for everything, Acacia, and I'm just so happy to have been a very small part of your journey, and I can't wait to hear about all the bigger and better things that you've gone on to do. And with that, I'd love to pass it on to your former supervisor, Dr. Stephen Cook, just to say a couple of words, if Steve, that's okay.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. So real pleasure to be here. It was also a real pleasure to have Acacia, now Dr. Frempong Manso, in our lab. And I say our, or on our team. Acacia was co-supervised, co-mentored by Dr. Keith Vanderite, who's an architect. We'll come back to that in a moment. So Acacia did her undergrad degree at McMaster. She was very involved in high-level varsity sports. She was also really engaged in science communication. When I was, reading her initial email reach out, it was all that leadership activity, science communication, community engagement work that had her jump off the page at me. And shortly thereafter, we had a phone call, and next thing you knew it, she was in Ottawa working with Professor Vivian Nguyen and myself for her master's. It was a COVID curveball. There was supposed to be field work. Instead, there was sitting behind computers, working with existing data sets, made lemons from lemonade, looking at waterfront stewardship activities. Towards the point of the pandemic when it was safe to be out and about, Acacia had a pretty serious hankering for field work. That's something she was pretty keen on when she came to Carleton, and we hadn't been able to satisfy. So working with Keith, the architect, who is somebody who'd been working in Florida. Keith had been helping develop seawalls that were inspired by biology. So they were had more natural habitat features and essentially trying to achieve conservation gains. And that was really the impetus for this work. And so in partnership with Keith and I, Acacia led a really impressive program that spanned the natural and social sciences, lab work and field work. While in our lab, she was super engaged, always helping others, very present in the lab, a mentor for others. And not surprisingly, she got snapped up rather quickly despite a brutal job market and is now working in the environmental consulting space for a company called ESSA. They're one of my favorites. They really are in a research support role. They aren't running about seeing, if this road trashed habitat. It's bigger picture. It's decision support, less structured decision making, evidence synthesis to support different clients. So pretty cool stuff. So with that, I'm going to flip it over to Case and thrilled to see what she has to say today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve. Kendra, it looks like I cannot share my screen. Okay, perfect.
There you go. I changed it to presenter, so you should be good. Yeah.
Dokie. And can everybody see my screen?
Looks
Perfect.
great.
Okay, so I will go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for the warm welcome and for the invitation. It's been really meaningful for me to be here speaking as a FishCAST alumni. I was, again, as Tina mentioned, a part of the first cohort of FishCAST, and I participated through both my master's and my PhD, and it was a major part of my graduate experience as well as my professional development. So today, I want to share a little bit more about that journey. I'll start by talking about my FishCAST experience and what the program meant to me. Then I'll kind of walk you through what my master's and PhD work was, focusing on my research and my developed questions about people and stewardship into questions about biodiversity, habitat, and shoreline design. And then after that, I'll talk a little bit about what came next beyond grad school and the skills that I built through FishCAST and a few things that I wish I'd known as a trainee. But one of the things that I really hope comes through during this talk is that my path was not linear. It evolved over time, but it was clear that there were connecting threads at the different stages. And for me, those threads have always been an interest in freshwater systems, applied conservation, and the intersection of ecology and people. And FishCAST has really helped me kind of keep those things together and not keep them separate. Sorry, I'm just going to plug in my laptop. Okay, so when I usually think of FishCAST, it is one of the foundations of my training. It's not just something I was affiliated with during grad school. It really shaped how I thought about research, collaboration, and my role as a scientist. So again, being a part of the first cohort of FishCAST was meaningful to me because it felt like we were helping to build that community straight from the beginning. There was a strong sense of being a part of something interdisciplinary and applied that really resonated with me. FishCAST brought together people working in fisheries, aquatic science, conservation, and management, and it created a space where it felt normal to ask, not just ask the what is happening ecologically questions, but also why does this matter and how can this inform practice kinds of questions. And these were really important for me because early on I was really interested in questions that crossed those boundaries. I was interested in ecology, but I'm also interested in people, in management, in stewardship. And FishCAST really helped me validate that those kinds of questions were worth pursuing. It also gave me a broader professional identity. I think graduate school can sometimes make you feel like you have to fit neatly into one category, but FishCAST helped me realize that it's possible to be interdisciplinary and still be really good at the rigorous kinds of science that you do that are specific. And it also helped me build relationships, communication skills, and confidence to speaking to different audiences. So what did I do for my master's and where did I do my master's? As Steve alluded, I did my master's at Carleton University under the supervision of him and Dr. Vivian Nguyen, and my master's specifically focused on the human side of shoreline management. At the time, I was really interested in how people think about their shorelines and how those views shape what they do on the landscape. Shorelines are such important spaces ecologically. They influence habitat quality, water quality, connectivity, and biodiversity. But at the same time, in many freshwater systems, they're also lived in and managed spaces. People make decisions about vegetation, structures, aesthetic, access, and maintenance, and those decisions can have real ecological consequences. So the broad kind of overarching question for my master's was, how do waterfront property owners perceive their shorelines and what do they value about them? And knowing that, how do those values reflect their stewardship behaviors? So to explore that, I use data from a Love Your Lake program, which is a program in partnership with the Canadian Wildlife Federation and Watersheds Canada, where they essentially evaluate your shoreline and provide you with a report card on how you can improve. And from there, using this data set, I got a large access shoreline data assessment data and associated social science information. And this was really exciting to me because it let me look at patterns beyond just one lake or one small case study. They originally piloted in Ontario, but they've then now since spanned out to other provinces such as BC and Nova Scotia. And I believe the plan is to continue to span to make this a national-wide program. And I was essentially able to examine waterfront property owners' perceptions of riparian aesthetics and shoreline management and connect those ideas to stewardship-related outcomes. What drew me to this work specifically was that it challenged a very common conservation assumption that if people know what's best ecologically, they will automatically behave in that way. But in reality, people's decisions are shaped by values, identity, aesthetics, norms, convenience, and emotional connections to place. And I really wanted to understand that complexity better. So this project was really about recognizing that shoreline conservation is not just about habitat or policy, it's also about people's relationships with those spaces and how those relationships influence decision making. So, what were some of the key insights I took away from my master's? One of the biggest lessons I took from my master's was that conservation depends on understanding people, not just ecosystems. The work showed that waterfront property owners held different relational values and perspectives about their shorelines. Many people valued beauty, recreation, naturalness, and personal connection, and these values often overlap in interesting ways with ecological stewardships. In other words, people are not always choosing between aesthetics and ecology. Sometimes these things were aligned, and sometimes they were in tension with each other. That was important because it suggested that outreach and stewardship efforts could be more effective if they connect the values people already hold, rather than assuming that there's only one right way to frame good shoreline management. Another key insight is that shoreline conditions often did reflect what people reported valuing, but not always in straightforward ways. The gap between values and behavior was really interesting for me. It reminds us that people care about ecological health and can still make decisions that are inconsistent with it because there are other constraints or priorities at play. For me, this was a really informative lesson. It helped me see that social science should not just be background conservation. It should be very central to it, and it shouldn't be an afterthought. If we want better outcomes, we need to understand motivations, values, perceptions, and barriers. And this work also shaped how I later approached my PhD work. It made me more attentive to the idea that environmental problems and solutions need to be understood as a social ecological context and not purely ecologically. And that became important for me and a thread that I kind of hopefully can show that I thread moving forward throughout both my degrees. So then for my PhD, as Steve mentioned, I loved doing my master's work so much and I did want to get field work. I stuck around at Carleton and I was supervised again by Steve and Dr. Keith Vanderwright. So my PhD was building on some of the same concerns as my master's, but from a different angle. Instead of focusing primarily on people's perceptions and stewardship, I shifted a little towards ecological effects of shoreline modification, specifically shoreline armoring. And I asked whether there were ways that we could design these structures better. Shoreline armoring is really important issue in freshwater systems because it's common. It's growing in many places and often reflects real human needs like erosion control, infrastructure protection, and proper stability. At the same time, conventional retaining walls and hardened shorelines can simplify habitat, alter environmental conditions, and have negative effects on aquatic communities. And there was so much work done in marine systems from my co-supervisor, Dr. Keith Vanderwright, but there's little known about how this can work for freshwater communities. So the central question of my PhD then became, if shorelines need to be stabilized or hardened, can we design these structures in ways that better support biodiversity and fish habitat? And what I really liked about this question was that it was both ecological and applied. It wasn't just asking whether armoring has impacts, although that is very, very important part of my thesis work. It was also asking whether are there realistic alternatives that we could do and use to improve our outcomes. And that made the work feel more relevant to conservation practice and management, at least for me, rather than framing it in the issue of it simply being an issue of binary natural equals good and armored equals bad. I wanted to explore the space kind of like in between, the kind of gray area that hasn't been explored explicitly in freshwater environments. In reality, many shorelines are modified and more will continue to be modified. So there is value in asking, how can we do this better? And this project gave me the opportunity to combine field ecology, experiments, spatial thinking, and applied conservation questions in a way that felt like a natural extension of the broader social ecological perspective that I was already starting to build for my master's. So one of the things I appreciated most about my PhD was that it was very interdisciplinary in practice, not just in theory. I combined ecology, social science work. I learned a lot about architecture, engineering, and I approached this question from very different angles. In the lab, I looked at fish responses to different degrees of structural complexity associated with vertical wall designs, as well as looking at how various sizes react to those complex structures. This helped me create kind of a more controlled setting where I could isolate how fish respond to habitat features. I also conducted a lab study looking at multi-species trials, which were really important because habitat design should not be based on a single species alone if the goal is broader biodiversity benefits. Different species interact with habitat differently, so looking across different species gave a better sense of whether modified shoreline features might have a wider ecological value. And then in the field, I looked at fish communities associated with different shoreline types, including more natural conditions, altered shorelines, and different hardening treatments. And that was important because field systems are often messy and complex, and it allowed me to see whether the patterns I saw in my controlled studies were reflected in real-world conditions. And I also incorporated a social science component, which mattered to me because shoreline design decisions are not just made in a vacuum. People care about aesthetics, they care about access, property protection, heritage, and many other factors. So it was really important for me to understand whether these modified designs might support ecological benefits, but also how people perceive shoreline stabilization and what might affect the acceptance or rejections of this new kind of component here in Canada. And taken together, this approach let me look at shoreline armoring as both an ecological and social issue. And that was the most rewarding part of my PhD for me, being able to work across methods and scales while keeping the applied questions at the center. So what were the major takeaways from my PhD? The major takeaway from my PhD is that shoreline armoring is not ecologically neutral. Conventional hardened shorelines often reduce structural complexity, and that matters because structural complexity is closely linked to refuge, foraging opportunities, habitat use, and biodiversity. Across the work, one of the clearest patterns that I saw was that more structurally complex designs were generally more favorable for fish than flat panels and conventional wall treatments. Fish tend to spend more time near more complex structures, and this was especially apparent for some species or life stages that benefited from cover or habitats that offered heterogeneity. This finding is important because it shows that designs matter and these details also matter. If we're going to continue to build or retrofit shoreline structures, those decisions should not be trivial from ecological perspectives, but they should also consider social science perspectives. Seemingly small changes in texture, complexity, or form can influence habitat value greatly. And at the same time, one of the things I want to emphasize is that natural shorelines should always be the ideal form of habitat from my perspective. My work is not arguing that modified concrete panels should be equivalent to natural systems, but rather the point that I want to hammer home is that where armoring is necessary, we can do better than conventional flat walls. And that's where I think the applied contribution of this research really sits. It offers evidence that more habitat-friendly shoreline infrastructure is possible and that biodiversity considerations can build into design conversations that might otherwise focus only on engineering or stabilization objectives. So for the simplest version of this message, if shorelines must be hardened, design matters. And that's probably the central takeaway, at least from an ecological standpoint of my PhD. So what about the social science aspect of it? One thing that remained important to me during my PhD was making sure that the work did not become completely ecological. Even the most promising design ideas still have to exist in human context. So part of my PhD also looked at the social science perspectives of shoreline stabilization, and I was really interested in how residents think about these interventions, what they notice, what they prefer, and how things like natural appearance, function, familiarity, heritage might influence their acceptance for a place like here in Ottawa on the Rideau Canal. This mattered to me because conservation solutions that make sense ecologically don't always make sense to people who are not ready to adopt, support, or even pay for it. And in places where shorelines are highly visible, inhabited, or have cultural meaning, aesthetic and social science values can play a major part in what drives the final decisions for acceptance. And what this reinforced for me was that I had already begun learning in my master's. Real world conservation is always relational. People are not external to the system, but they are a part of the system. Their values, preferences, and concerns shapes what ultimately gets implemented. So even though the PhD had a stronger ecological focus overall, this part of the work really helped me maintain that social ecological lens. It reminded me that goods conservation solutions have to work in both dimensions. They need to produce good ecological benefits, but they also need to be realistic, acceptable, and legible to people living with them and who have to use them. And that has stayed with me beyond graduate school because a lot of the lessons that I've learned apply to many environmental problems. Evidence matters, but uptake matters too. So now I'm kind of at the point in this presentation where I'll talk to you a little bit about what happened beyond graduate school now that I've graduated. So beyond grad school, I carried out many of these same interests into my applied environmental work. What changed is mainly the context, but not really the underlying questions that I'm helping address in my day-to-day work. Across government, non-for-profit, and community-based conservation settings, I've continued to work on problems that sit at the intersection of ecology, stewardship, evidence, and decision-making. That includes work related to monitoring, conservation planning, biodiversity, applied assessments, and engagement. And what I found really valuable is that my graduate training prepared me for more than one kind of role. The ecological background matters for sure. The social science background mattered for sure. The ability to be able to analyze data mattered, but just as importantly, so did my soft skills, like being able to communicate well, being able to do knowledge synthesis, and the ability to work across different perspectives and priorities. I think one of the most important transitions after grad school is realizing that in applied settings, scientific knowledge is one part of a larger decision environment. There are timelines, trade-offs, policy constraints, community priorities, and implementation realities, and that can be really challenging, but it's also where science can be really impactful. For me, that has always been one of the most rewarding parts about moving beyond academia, seeing how the kinds of questions I was asking in grad school can still matter in very practical ways, and threading connections of all of it has been a desire to use research and systems thinkings to help better support environmental decisions. So when I think about what I built through FishCast and graduate school more broadly, I think about both the technical and professional skills that I developed. On the research side, I developed a strong grounding in freshwater ecology, but I also learned how to work across social science and ecological questions. That interdisciplinary comfort has been incredibly valuable to me. I also built skills in statistical analysis, spatial analysis, study design, field methods, and translating complex questions into traceable research. But what stands out to me just as much are my professional skills. FishCast gave me repeated opportunities to communicate my work, interact with people from different disciplinary backgrounds, and think about how research connects to management and conservation practice. These experiences help me become more research connects, these experiences help me become more confident in not only as a researcher, but also as my communicator and a collaborator. And I think one of the biggest strengths of the FishCast program to me is the ability to kind of go beyond our research skills and build those soft skills. They don't just help you produce a thesis, they help you build a toolkit, and that toolkit is what carries you forward in whatever comes next. And for the trainees, I really hope, and I think something that's important to mention is that the skills that you are building now, they may seem not immediately useful to you right now. You just think doing synthesis and doing your thesis is just something you have to do. But I want you to know that learning to present clearly and working across disciplines and doing synthesis literature for different audiences can really be a central skill that you can have later on once you enter the job market. And kind of just to wrap up, if I could go back and tell myself a few things on what I would like to know, one would be that I didn't need to know everything and have everything figured out right away. I think there can be a lot of pressure in grad school to define your path very early on and move through that line in a straight line, try not to vary off. But in my experience, careers, research journeys are often more iterative than that. What matters not that everything unfolds exactly as it's planned, but that you keep building those skills, you keep asking those meaningful questions, and you stay open to where opportunities may lead you. Another thing I really wish I understood early on that interdisciplinary can be a real strength. Sometimes working across ecology, social science, applied questions, or even architecture, engineering, it can feel like you don't neatly fit into one box and that you can't meaningfully contribute. But that can actually become one of your greatest assets, especially when the problems you care about and the work that you could do beyond grad school are complex and don't fit in neatly into one box either. And lastly, I would also say that communication matters just as much as your technical skills. Being able to explain why your work matters, to connect it with different audiences, and to collaborate well is incredibly important after grad school. And lastly, relationships matter. Your relationships with your mentors, your peers, your collaborators, and communities that you work with will shape your experience more than you sometimes realize in the moment. And one of the most important things you can build during grad school are not just projects or publications, but relationships and different ways of thinking. So if I had to summarize it, I would say be open, stay curious, build broadly, and do not worry if your path doesn't look perfectly linear. And just to kind of rack up and looking back, FishCast was not just a part of my graduate training, but it shaped how I think about science, conservation, and my current role in the environmental work that I do more broadly. My master's taught me that if we want better conservation outcomes, we need to understand people and their values in stewardship. My PhD taught me that shoreline design matters and that there are opportunities to rethink hardened structures in ways to better support biodiversity. And beyond graduate school, those lessons have continued to shape how I approach environmental challenges now in my day-to-day job. And if there's one message that I could leave you with, it's probably that meaningful conservation work often happens at the intersection of ecology, people, and practice. And for me, FishCast really helped that intersection feel not only possible, but exciting and worth pursuing. And I'm really grateful to have been part of such an amazing community, and I'm happy to answer any questions now.
Amazing. Oh, Acacia, thank you so much. That was such a thoughtful presentation. And it was just so meaningful. I could just feel the warmth coming through and your desire to really connect with your audience today. So thank you, thank you. For those of you who are new to joining us in terms of what we do now, we have FishCAST trainees as part of our audience. And what we like to do is just have our speaker and our trainees just ask questions to one another. But I realize we also have non-trainees on the call. So I would love to open it up to any questions we have. And trainees, if you need to go at a certain time, maybe get your question in now. But please don't forget, you can ask Acacia some really questions about how did she apply, like maybe some more like, how did you apply? What were your challenges? What are you working on now to help guide? And Acacia, you'd be such a perfect mentor for this. All right. So with that being said, who would like to, or who has questions for Acacia at this time? Steve just wants to say that you do have mad concrete pouring skills, Acacia. So in case anyone wants to need to know about concrete, Acacia is also the person to go to. Okay, I'm sorry. Kat, please go ahead. Oh, and we'll stop recording if that's okay. So everyone feels free to ask questions. Oh, Kendra did it already. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted